A lot of people are experiencing Batman fatigue right now. I know I am. Yeah. Doing this week in Batman show every week, it's so much. It's hard to get excited about Batman at this point. Now, we do have a special guest with us, Josh McDonald, who works at BatmanNews.com. This is your favorite setting in comic books.
It is.
How's it feeling for you?
I think the word you're trying to avoid or possibly find was that reading Batman comics is starting to feel like a chore.
It feels like work.
Yeah, it really does. It's starting to feel like a chore. And this is coming from someone who used to, write reviews on a weekly basis for free there for a few years. And now even getting paid trying to cover this stuff, I'm just like...
It's absolutely insane the amount that they've got out there. We know that Perch just did a recent video where the 48 of the top 50 selling DC comics, I believe in December, were Batman or Batman related. That's crazy. Ridiculous. It's insane. We look at the solicitations going out into April 2022. 52% of all their new comics solicited are led by Batman or Batman related.
Yep.
It's become an epidemic at DC Comics. They're leaning on the character, their most popular character, and really the golden goose that's keeping the whole, publisher afloat right now as far as comic books go. And they're leaning on him so hard, eventually everything has to topple. Jimmy Palmiotti, who obviously has worked in comic books a long time, most notably with Daredevil and some things like that, certainly has worked with his fair share of Batman-related characters. He actually had a tweet that came out yesterday, and a lot of people responded to it. This is what he had to say. So my local comic shop is telling me that customers are having Batman burnout, that there are way too many Bat titles out right now, and a lot of people are cutting pre-orders, losing interest, and looking for other titles to buy. Anyone else notice this? And a lot of people chimed in from Batman fans to just DC fans to comic book retailers, and it feels like a kind of across the board, and we've been hearing this and warning about it here on the channel, that this is in fact what's going on. As you said, you work at BatmanNews.com. You're not doing the reviews as much anymore, but you are still kind of behind the scenes. I saw Jay Yaz in there, one of their Batman reviewers. He was like, "Yes, this is too much."
Yeah, this is actually something that we've discussed at Batman News and Felt for a little while, and then it's only gotten worse and worse and worse in terms of the number of Batman books that DC is publishing. And on one hand, I understand that Batman sells, so I understand why they're publishing so many Batman comics. But at the same time, that strategy, all it's going to do is just undermine every other aspect of their brand and diminish it. And it's what we're seeing. You referenced Perch discussing the top 50 sales list, and having 48 Batman titles in there and then only 2 other titles, you're seeing that. It's not a good approach to take from DC's standpoint.
And it's certainly, kind of rippling its way down to retailers. If you would expect they would see it first, as all of a sudden maybe people they would expect to go in and buy these Batman titles. They ordered for the numbers that they're usually used to people pulling. All of a sudden they stop pulling them because they're like, I've spent enough money on Batman. Maybe I want to spend some more time on another character, or maybe I just want to go over to Marvel because all I can find at DC Comics is Batman. And that's not healthy for the industry, and it's bad news for comic retailers. These comic books aren't returnable.
No.
Once they order them and pay for them, they're kind of stuck with them. And DC Comics has really put them in a terrible position as to what to do with Batman comics now.
Yeah, even taking it from my local comic shop, my LCS owner, we've had conversations, and even from the approach of ordering, there's so many new Batman things coming out, and some things are a hit, some things are not a hit, but there's no rhyme or reason to what's popular with customers and what's not. So him just trying to make orders, he's like, I couldn't tell you if we should buy in depth or buy less, or so for him, it's a gamble. And it's also just the matter of he's watched people that feel like they need to pick up a Batman book because they might miss something, and Batman's what they're more into, stop buying other titles. And these same people that are doing this would often find themselves preferring other titles back when they were buying them. So it's a really interesting and weird situation that DC's gotten themselves into.
And they've got a quality problem. There's only so many good Batman stories that you can tell right now. There's only so many writers that are right for the character, and there's only so many artists that are right for the character. It's not like everyone is just the best Batman writer or artist. And there's a lot of crossover in these stories where they're kind of telling the same stories, they're using the same characters, or they're exploring the same exact like aspects of the character, and it gets very, very repetitive.
It gets super repetitive. It's a combination of being too repetitive because it's all at once, and then they're also shooting themselves in the foot because where they could potentially have a year's worth of stories to tell, they're now like just cramming it into like a year to 2 years. I'm a big like long-term, big picture kind of guy, and it just seems like everything DC's doing is the opposite.
Yeah, there are some good Batman stories out there, but there's so many, there's a lot of stuff that's going to fall through the cracks. A lot of people, if they wanted an interesting take on Batman that's different than anything they're really going to see, Batman and the Imposter was probably the comic book for them. Yep. But if they were so overwhelmed by the titles, they might not have even discovered it. If you want something that's a little bit more high-paced, action-based, it seems like that Batman story from Jacques might be the Batman comic for them. But we've got a weekly Shadows of the Batman event going on right now. We're going event. We just had Fear State. We're going into Shadows of the Bat, which we're in right now, a weekly event for 3 months, and then we're going right out of that into Shadow War, which is a Batman, Robin, Deathstroke thing. That's a lot of fucking Batman events, and apparently, from what we're seeing,
it's way too much.
From retailers, it's also killing off their sale of graphic novels and trades, which absolutely Batman is king there too.
You talked about the number of titles hitting. Another thing that I've seen when going into shops is space. Some of these comic shops are tiny. And my local shop, we're lucky enough that we're in a small like country part of Texas that they have a larger shop. But I was in Dallas yesterday and I hopped into a comic shop, and their space is so tiny that for their comics, they're having to layer them, fan them across so that each one can't just sit on its own. But once customers come up and start touching stuff, all the Batman stuff is just kind of like mushed together. So you can't even, there might be like 5 Batman titles out that week, but you can't see them all. They're literally just stacked on top of each other. So I was like, man, I feel for shops, and I wish DC would try to take a different perspective with their Batman strategy.
Well, I think it's all in preparation. We know this Discovery DC merger is coming up. I'm sure they want to stabilize their sales, and they know the one thing that they can sell, no matter whether it's good or bad, almost no matter who they put the writer on, it's going to have a minimum sales number that's higher than almost everything else, is Batman itself. But if you wear out the character and all of a sudden the sales drop on there, you're kind of setting yourself up for failure when this merger happens, and you're going to make yourself kind of look stupid.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where there are. I feel like we are at that tipping point where people are feeling, I mean, it's what Palmiotti said. We're at that tipping point. People are verbally communicating their burnout. So if they're communicating that to the shops over the next 3 months, you're going to see sales drop. How drastically, we'll see. With every title, we'll see. But it's going to happen. Like the dam has broken. It's going to happen.
Well, and they've set themselves up for so much failure after this because they've kind of burnt their bridges with a lot of other characters. They're killing off the Justice League. They say we're not getting Justice League comics for months afterwards. Yeah. Right now, there's a pretty good story for Superman in Action Comics, but the title that says Superman on it isn't very good, and it doesn't actually feature the real Superman. They're replacing Aquaman. They've already mentioned that Jackson Hyde is going to replace Arthur Curry. And they've got so much Wonder Woman content out there, a character that unfortunately does not sell as much as you would think a Trinity character would, but they're actually watering down that character. Like, if they decide to change course, there's nowhere left for them to go unless they do a full-on crisis again. We just had a crisis with Dark Knight's Death Metal, whether they want to call it that or not. We're into Infinite Frontier. We're not even really a year into it, and it's already time to reset.
Yeah, it's true though. It is. Like, we really are just not. You're right. Not even a year. Because I think once we hit March, it'll officially be a year. April, March. I understand wanting to build up these smaller characters and try to give them some legs and try to grow. I guess the width of your line, but they're doing it by diminishing their top selling characters. So I think it's it's a false positive there, and ultimately futile. Like, it's not going to serve them the way they're hoping it will. Yeah,
you shouldn't have your biggest Batman fans tapping out and saying no more. Like, I've had enough. They should be frothing at the mouth, champing at the bit every single Tuesday to get in there and make sure they get their Batman titles. And they're kind of signing off, and they're doing a lot of variant covers to sell the same comics to the same people. DC Comics just has some really, really short-term strategies.
Yep.
As somebody that's been following the industry for a long time, you've reviewed a lot of Batman comics, feels pretty overwhelmed by the line right now. What could they do right now?
We're seeing this trend of trying to tell everything at once. But I think you've got all these lesser titles that you just need to do away with. Like we've got more than one, I think 2 or 3 anthology titles. So you have Urban Legends, you have Legends of the Dark Knight. Pick one and go with it. Urban Legends seems to be their better seller. And the idea was to focus on the characters that didn't have their own books in that book, which I think is a good strategy. They should have just kept it, scrap Legends of the Dark Knight. You have books like Joker, a puzzle book. Why? Like, why do we need it? You know, there's all these.
Also got the Joker.
Yeah, you've got the Harley Quinn, and I get this is off the TV series, but the Harley Quinn Eat Bane Kill tour or whatever. Like, everything should be spaced out, and rather than just like slamming it all down at once, if you were to give it some time, I think you would see much more success. But throwing everything out all at once, we know Joker, the main title's ending in April. So I would have just saved a puzzle book for that. Like if someone wants Joker there, you can continue your Joker story there. But there's just too much, way too much. Yeah,
I'm not sure what DC Comics really can do. Obviously, this is the strategy at least through April, and I don't see it ending anytime soon. They're starting new Batman titles, even in that month. Like I said, they're killing off major teams. The Justice League isn't going to be around. And people, they're not buying into these changes. Yeah, they were able to spike a number with Superman Son of Kal number 5. By all other measurements, it looks like the numbers went right back to where they were before, if not a little bit lower.
Yep.
And there's no room for anything to really pop and be good unless it's like a Jeff Johns book or somebody with a big name, because Batman is overshadowing everything.
Yep. I would venture to say, like, we don't have exact numbers because publishers aren't sharing. We used to get exact numbers from Diamond. But looking at where DC potentially falls in the overall list, it doesn't look like they're performing like they used to. It's a shame, but they created their own problem.
Absolutely. It sucks. I am a DC fan at heart. I like DC comics more than I like Marvel comics.
Agreed.
Right now, there are more decent Marvel titles than there are DC titles, because there's only like Robin, Flash, Batman's pretty good right now, but that just kind of happened. Yeah,
Suicide Squad, and then other than that, it's like Black Label. That Black Label is the only thing I tend to sometimes get excited for. Even then, I'm like, I don't know.
There's a lot of Batman fatigue. People are taking notice. They're even well-established creators with the industry are taking notice, and they're kind of calling DC Comics out, and they're saying nothing. That's another problem, Josh, is they're not communicating with anybody as far as what they want. It doesn't feel like they're listening to customers, and it feels like Jim Lee is just sitting up there, in his high castle, looking down at the peasants.
Yeah, I'm not saying that we should bend to fans' will. I think that could be super dangerous, but at some point you've got to have some type of filter to take in the feedback you're getting to say, okay, there might be something worth looking at here. Let's have a meeting. And it doesn't seem like that's happening at all.
Earlier this week, my friend Dylan and I talked about 5 changes we think that could help DC Comics in the very short term. If you haven't checked this video out, there's hope for DC Comics if they listen to us.